Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Tim Van Orden, and this is episode 13, Eisenberg Class. We'll be starting off with some Star Trek news, and then discussing Discovery Season 3, Episode 5, Die Trying.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main story concerning Aron Eisenberg, his connection with Star Trek Discovery, and his connection with all of us through Nog. We hope you enjoy it. Stick around.
Okay, in my defense, as much as I enjoyed the episode, it was not nearly as dramatic as that title suggested. So there was a little bit of an
oversell. Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But, I think it's a pretty dramatic episode. I mean, there's people dying and high stakes and seeing Starfleet for the first time and all that. It's pretty dramatic. Yeah. Although it's a good thing that you called it Die Trying. Earlier, was I talking to you?
Nope.
No, I was talking to somebody and I called it Time to Die. I realized that I was trying to make make it into a James Bond film, I guess. I don't know. Hi Tim, how are you?
Doing all right, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad to be recording our episode.
Peachy keen. Yeah, me too.
I want to hear some Star Trek news. I hear you have some.
We discussed this prior to the show. I don't have any.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We did discuss this prior to the show because this is not a scripted show.
That's right.
At all. We don't have any plans.
Well, you sure as anything don't.
I sure don't. So what we did want to talk about. Okay, so all right. Here's the thing I brought up. We don't have a lot in the Star Trek news bin today, but we do have one cool thing. So this story concerns the city of Boston. Who in Star Trek do you think is from Boston?
You mean like characters or actors?
No, actors. What Star Trek actor? Famous big Star Trek actor would you say is probably from Boston?
How famous?
As
famous. Like anyone would know the actor's name, or like only geeks like us would know
that's giving you too much information.
Well, otherwise it's way too broad of a question.
Well, but if I feel like I just one of the big, let's say one of the top 10.
From a single series or across all of Star Trek?
From Star Trek. I would say one of the top 10 of Star Trek.
Who's from Boston? After all of that, I have no idea.
Guess one of the easiest answers you could possibly have.
William Shatner.
Ah, so close. Leonard Nimoy.
That was going to be my second guess.
Yeah, right. Of course, because Leonard Nimoy. I mean, obviously,
that Boston accent is so strong. It's hard to understand him sometimes.
He's like, this car is parked illogically.
Live long and prosper. Apologies to all of the Bostonians listening to it.
Yeah, as two native Texans do our terrible Boston accents. The only reason I can do that is because I've seen Jaws a few times. Okay, so. There is a proposed monument, memorial to Leonard Nimoy in Boston.
Fascinating.
I know it's a good response. The proposed sculpture. It's the proposed sculpture would be sculptor David Phillips has lived in Boston since 1970, and he started working on this concept of this memorial, and it would be like a giant hand giving a Vulcan salute. On a pedestal.
Boy, my first thought is 500 years from now when archaeologists are digging through Boston and they come across that, they're going to be like, what the heck?
Well, that's what the plaque's for.
I mean, they're not going to understand our emoji language that's going to be on the...
Yes, they are. That is an ancient symbol, sir. It is. It is an ancient symbol. We will do a special episode on the origin of the Vulcan salute and its connection with Judaism, and that is a symbol for the name of God. That is the symbol for Shin, for the Hebrew letter Shin, and it means shalom and shaddai and all those good things. So, but the Nimoy family's on board with it, and the project is estimated to maybe cost $200,000 to $250,000. There's a nonprofit being set up for it, and I think it's really cool. I think it's exciting. So they're looking at some feedback and trying to figure it out, and yeah. David, Julie Nimoy tweeted about it, and yeah,
Exciting.
it is exciting. It's cool. Pretty soon, Leonard Nimoy will be as cool as Catherine Janeway. So
You're just trying to shoehorn some Janeway news in there so that we don't
that's really
break our trend.
just me trying to shoehorn in some Janeway news.
Well, speaking of Janeway news, it's not news, but that does segue into that nice little cameo we got in the episode, right?
Yep, of the Voyager. That was pretty cool.
Along -J.
Yes, the Voyager J. We've seen the Enterprise J before.
Wait, what?
The Enterprise J.
When did we see J?
There's an image of it in an episode of Enterprise.
Huh.
When Archer gets his glimpse into the future.
Okay.
He is shown a Enterprise J, the Enterprise J. Yep. So there you go.
Speaking of Enterprise, this is completely random. I had no intention of throwing this in here until you said that, but I just saw a theory on the interwebs, the Daystrom Institute subreddit that I like to frequent.
Yes.
And I won't go into detail, but it's just a fun little theory that the burn was the mutually assured destruction that ended the temporal Cold War.
Oh. See, I thought the burn was just after some, really intense pizza.
Well, I mean, usually it's Taco Bell, but
I wouldn't know. I literally have not eaten Taco Bell in over 20 years.
Wow.
Yep. Pretty proud of that. But anyway, so yeah, that does kind of segue us into the episode, into the Discovery episode.
What'd you think?
I
knew it was coming, so I wanted to.
I see you thwarted me there, sir. I see that. Don't think I didn't notice.
Oh, I know you noticed.
Oh yeah, I know you know. Oh boy, we almost did that last week too. Yeah, no, I enjoyed it a great deal. It was a very different experience from the first 3 or 4 episodes of the season. It didn't have that like one big theme feel to it, which made it difficult to construct this episode, which we'll talk about a little later. But it is a really cool, and we get to see so much cool stuff. I loved going to Starfleet for the first time and seeing the Voyager and seeing all the cool things. And I got to say, that moment, that bit was probably the emotional peak of the episode for me. But I thought it was a great episode. I love the casting of some of the newer characters we saw, and it was exciting. What do you think?
It's good. I enjoyed it.
That's the kind of insight that I always expect now, because that's all I ever do when I ask you. It was cool. I really enjoyed David Cronenberg being in the episode.
Who is David Cronenberg?
That's the guy with the glasses who.
What's the deal with him?
What's the deal with him?
The actor? Yeah, is he someone special or something, or has he been in something that I should know?
Well, yeah, he's David Cronenberg.
I had to ask you who that was. So,
David Cronenberg, he's a director actually. He's a very well known director. Probably best known for The Fly.
Oh,
yeah, but he did.
Never seen it.
The Fly, Dead Ringers,
Nope.
Existence, Crash.
Nope.
Well, not the Oscar-winning Crash, but the other Crash is the one he did. Anyway, he's well known. He did one of the. He did. He's a well-known director. He's kind of one of those like really cultish guys, kind of like I say cultish, but kind of like John Waters or whatever. Not exactly like John Waters, but he's
film geeks know who he is.
Yeah, like film nerds know him, but the rest of the world might only know The Fly. or might only know Dead Ringers or something like that, but
Right. Because when you say like he's a well-known director, like I'm thinking like Spielberg or
yeah, no, not well known like that. Well known more like David Lynch or something like that.
Oh yeah, I know David Lynch.
Yeah. See, you're right. He's he's in that.
What's in the box?
No, that's David Fincher.
Oh, close enough. I guess I don't know David Lynch.
David
Who's
Lynch
David
would be
Lynch?
like Twin Peaks.
I've seen like half an episode.
Right, exactly. So there you go. So
is he the main actor, the main character?
No, he's the creator. He's the of Twin Peaks.
Okay.
The director. Anyway. So David Cronenberg, boy, this has turned into a while.
I completely forgot it because it took me 3 days to watch the episode. Don't get me started about CBS All Access.
Oh, okay. All right.
But that reminds me, I'd completely forgotten. I loved, even though that little interview sequence where they're like cutting between different interviews is like such a ripoff from Firefly.
Ah, okay.
I loved the interview with Giorgio.
Yes. That was beautiful. It was really
that was a lot of fun.
I love that scene. I think Cronenberg and Michelle Yeoh just really we're just in rhythm there. We're in rhythm. I could watch a whole movie, the two of them together.
And I'm really intrigued to know what's going on with her because we got that little bit. Was it towards the end where Burnham's walking by her and she's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And she's all like spaced out for a second there. Right, I want to know what happened now because obviously there was something between her breaking the toy he had and the comm badge and this. So
yeah, well, and I'm wondering if it's the revelation that the Terran Empire is gone. I wonder if it has something to do with that like her whole
maybe
because she seemed a little shocked by that while he was.
What did you think? Speaking of that, what did you think of his comment that they discovered that the Terrans had a biological reasoning for their evilness?
Yeah, that is interesting. He was saying that they tend to do what they do for no reason. Like they don't need a particular reason to do whatever. They just do whatever. Like it's more of a philosophical commitment to just like whatever.
Right, but he said that there's a biological component because they were able to identify her right away when they scanned her.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to go back and look at the dialogue on that because I don't remember exactly how all that played out. But yeah,
it felt very much like a midi-chlorian moment to me.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of detracted from the philosophical nature of evil,
Mm-hmm. So you're feeling like that they were saying in that scene that there's something biological in people from that universe,
right?
That causes them to be sort of
to tend towards evil, yeah. Or not necessarily evil, but the sort of self-serving.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really get that from the scene, but that if that's correct, then that may be really interesting because I have thought, especially as we've gone through with some of the Mirror Universe episodes in Discovery, I have thought about how weird it is that the whole Mirror Universe is like where everybody's bad for some reason, and what a strange conceit that is. And which made me which makes the idea that hey, there's some reason for it interesting.
Well, and it's not that everybody's bad; it's that everybody's opposite, right? Like people who are bad in, right? Isn't it? Don't we have like bad people or
anybody nice? I can't think of anybody in the Mirror Universe who's like fighting for justice or peace.
Yeah,
everybody's just kind of at each other's throats.
Yeah, that's fair. So it's not really a mirror, then, is it?
It's like it is. It's weird. It's like
the edgelord universe.
Yeah, it's like the moral core has just been sucked out of the universe for some reason.
Yeah,
which I mean, really is interesting because as a concept, it's just a way of. I think it's a way of exploring a world where there is no grounding in any kind of moral core where there is no soul, I guess. And like, what does that look like? How does that play out? And then, especially in Deep Space Nine, like, but I think the original concept in Mirror Mirror in the original series is how do we then take soulishness, if you will? How do we then take a moral core into that world? And then the ramifications of that in Deep Space Nine, where we found out that that went completely awry. And then we're still trying to interact with that world, and the sort of, just the same way we get sort of moral grayness, I guess, that creeps into even our hero characters in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In the same way, in the mirror universe in that series, we get some moral rectitude that sort of creeps into our distorted mirror universe characters. And I think the Mirror Georgiou is sort of like an embodiment of that whole interplay. And so it's just interesting to see where that's going to go. If Georgiou can find her heart. So, yeah, I don't know. It's another. I may have just drained that dry and then handed it to you, but
I mean, par for the course. Let me give you this deep philosophical understanding. What do you think, Tim? Yeah, what you said.
I'm sorry. I'm just sorry.
I know. There's a reason that you're top billing and I'm color.
You call yourself color, sir. That is a label you selected for yourself many years ago. I had nothing to do with that. But,
honestly, it just kind of lowers the bar for me.
Just makes your job easier.
Basically.
Oh boy! So what else do we like about this episode? I mean, what did you think about the reveal of Starfleet, the new Starfleet / Federation? They're in one place now. How'd you like that?
I liked the uniforms. I liked the Admiral. The Admiral was cool. I got to say, I'm glad it didn't turn out this way. Although I'm still kind of afraid that it might. But I really hate it when, like, you've got a show or a series or something where you've got two good guys and they don't trust each other, and they don't just like sit down and realize that they can trust each other. And I was afraid that was what the rest of the season was going to be, but it all got kind of wrapped up there at the end. So I was very pleased that they weren't going to be the black sheep here or whatever. Yeah, at odds the whole time. Right. Although there's someone pointed out in a previous episode. Do you remember in the saloon episode, right? The second episode. When, and I can't remember the guy's name, but the main villain there, he walks in and he identifies Saru and Tilly as Vidrash.
Okay.
And it's spelled V''DRAYSH. Someone pointed out that this is a pigeon, which he does mention, everyone speaks pigeon, of Federation.
Oh. Wow. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm still kind of worried that Discovery is going to discover some dark secret within the heart of the Federation, and that kind of has me a little bit worried because I don't want that. But
why would his assessment of Federation people give you an idea that there's something wrong with Federation?
Because the way he was like, oh, they're not going to help you. They're Vidrash, as if like everybody knows the Vidrash are the bad guys here.
Oh, okay. Well, but that's his narrative.
That's true. That's fair. But just the way it was so offhandedly tossed out makes me feel like it's just taken for granted.
But then the other side of that is the reason that the people there had faith in them was because they're Federation.
Right.
So I think it has to do with perspective. So
true.
But yeah, true. But I agree with you. I did like that. Like the distrust didn't remain. I've talked to people who still, after viewing the episode like more than once, don't trust Admiral Vance.
Oh yeah, and they're totally playing that up. They want you to be distrustful of him, I think.
See, I didn't feel that way. Like I saw the episode. At the beginning, once you have that really joyous thing, and then he starts saying we're gonna, what is it? We're gonna commandeer the Discovery and all that kind of stuff. And everybody's faces fall. It's like, wait, you're splitting up the crew and all that, and you think, oh no, right? And
well, I mean, it's not going to happen though.
Right, probably. But he does start to get that sort of Badmiral vibe. But by the end of the episode, that went away for me because I felt like that distrust that was there on his part was completely reasonable.
Sure. I loved the line, we have two truths.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the rest of the line
Yeah,
as much
that,
as I
that
loved
never
it.
ends well, is what.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have two truths, and that never ends well. Yeah, Oded Fair, by the way, is the actor there.
Mm-hmm.
I love him.
Fabulous job. Yeah, I
he
loved him.
He was great, and I was trying to figure out where I recognized him from, and it's because one of my wife's favorite movies is The Mummy. He was in The Mummy, and he was
like
really
the original Brendan Fraser mummy.
Yeah, Brendan Fraser.
Oh my gosh! Yes, he was the dude with the hawk.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh, I loved him.
Yeah. So it was cool.
Okay.
I was like, I recognize him, and he's awesome.
Yeah, I have to tell my wife now.
Yeah. She'll like that. But yeah. So it was good. So that's the thing too. At the end of the episode, when Saru and Vance are talking about Jado, right? And the Renaissance and looking up and all that kind of thing, I felt like the way Vance kind of vibed with Saru then, like could tell where Saru was going.
Where he was just like they saw depth.
He's like, yeah, and he's like, yes, you could help people look up. He sees that and he's right on board. He locks in with that. To me, that was where it was like, okay, yeah. He is one.
Yeah, I got a lot more comfortable with the character at that point. As an aside, sorry I know you hate it when I derail you like this, but
no, not at all.
From a amateur historian's perspective, I do want to say I took a little bit of issue with Saru's generalization of the Dark Ages as being very Eurocentric.
Yes.
This was European Dark Ages, not Earth's Dark Ages. There were other civilizations that were going through pretty good times during all of that. So,
and my friend who is a medieval historian would also say that what are called the Dark Ages were not so dark after all. That actually the idea is that like the church was in charge, right? And that's kept science to the side. And kept science from progressing, and then the Renaissance happened, and we put all the religion stuff aside and moved forward. But what he argues is that the church actually was the only institution that kept science alive in Europe during those times.
Yeah.
So that there's actually that the Dark Ages aren't really so dark. In fact, we might link to his article on that.
Well. But on the same side, on the flip side, though, I mean, there was definitely dark times in Europe.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
And it's also worth pointing out that the Renaissance depends on your perspective. Like, sure, the wealthy people that could afford to pay artists well, wealthy people got wealthy and artists got employed, but poor farmers during this quote unquote Renaissance, nothing changed for them, right? They're still poor farmers.
Right. But I think the question there, and I think what Saru is appealing to is like we say, is that ability to look up, as it were.
Sure.
That there's something there that is inspiring to people. There's a voice of hope, right? In culture. So I find that fascinating, and that exchange between them for me was where I could see was kind of like with Ndoye in what is it? Is it People of Earth, where she's the captain of the United Earth Defense League or whatever it is. Seems very almost evil, right? Or not evil, but just seems like things are going to go bad, right?
Yeah.
And then it turns out that it's really just this self-protective reaction that if you get past it, you can start to figure out what's really there. And I think that happens a lot. Like, I think that's kind of part of human nature too, right? That we have a tendency to want to protect ourselves, want to protect maybe our way of life, maybe the only way we know how to survive, whatever that is, right? Whatever it is that we cling to, we have a tendency to want to protect it, and we see things that are different. We see things that are potential challenges to that, and we may not see something that's friendly at first.
Cough, cough, cough. War on Christmas. Cough, cough.
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Where it's just, there's this sense that we have to cling to things that ground us, because we're really afraid of outside attack. And I think we've seen that sensibility show up a couple of times in this season, as our crew have encountered, others who are of this time period, and seen the suspicion with which they're met. But they move past that. They push past that.
The crew of Discovery is like a little puppy that just wants to be friends. And everybody else is like scared the dog will bite them.
I guess maybe so. Oh, that's interesting, because that's kind of a thing in Star Trek. A lot of times, we encounter something that seems threatening at first, right? But but its actions are actually attempts to communicate or what have you.
Don't run. We are your friends.
Right. Right. Exactly. So it's very much. It's just kind of flipping that idea that, like, now we are the threatening thing, right? And even though I think Discovery definitely has felt threatened too by the people they've encountered, it's been a bit mutual. But I think it's interesting that you put it that way. The puppy wants to be friends, but everybody's afraid they're going to be bitten. That's pretty good.
So what else did we like in the episode?
What else? Well, we have the whole story with Non. What did you think of that?
I was extremely disappointed that we don't get to see more of the character.
Yeah, I'm there with you on that.
Now, she hasn't really had a whole lot to do.
True.
But I would have liked to have seen that change.
Yeah, I tend to agree. That's the thing. Like, Non is kind of connected with Arium just narratively, right?
You might say she's non-essential.
Oh my gosh.
Non-essential personnel.
Wow.
I can tell, like, days in the future, whenever my wife is listening to this, she is rolling her eyes so hard right now.
Oh, you assume I'm leaving it in the episode.
Oh, you're going to leave it in the episode because I'm going to keep referring back to it so often that it will make editing a nightmare for you to cut it.
Editing's already a nightmare. Don't worry about it. But
challenge accepted.
No, don't do it. I'm leaving it in, all right?
All right.
This is extortion, man.
Extortion is such
what were we talking
messy
about?
Word.
Right. No, so Non is connected with Arium just narratively, right? But it's also kind of the Arium effect with Non.
Right.
It just seems like once we get these secondary or even tertiary characters, these ones that are we talked last week about there not being the core seven, and like there's so many people around Saru's table, and it's like once we start developing any of them, then they get written out, and they get written out that episode.
Yeah. Which is why I'm worried for Detmer.
Oh yeah, like don't develop Detmer or Owo too much, because we might lose them. We won't lose them. Detmer and Owoskun are safe, I think, but it is, and I don't think it's something that's going to continue. And it's possible that Non will come back because she's still in Starfleet. So
right, yeah, I mean, there's a chance we might see her again.
There's a chance, yeah. And we were talking. I think you and I were talking earlier this week about the title of the episode, "Die Trying," and why it is die trying. And I think at the time I was saying about how the crew of the Discovery is having to try to prove themselves to the new Starfleet, and it's basically a do or die situation. Like they are either going to prove who they are and be accepted as who they are, or this whole project of the Discovery as it is, as this breathing organism, as Michael calls it, is going to fall apart. That's one side of it, but I also think of the Barzan man who's a scientist who's trying to preserve his family, right? And that he is going to die trying to save his family. Because he's trying to save his family, but at the same time, he needs medical attention, but he won't accept it because he wants to stay there.
Right.
And that's going to lead to his death. So there's another angle. I just thought of that today. So there you have it.
Very well. Very good. What he said.
But what he said, yeah.
And I liked speaking of the Barzan people there, I liked the conversation that happened between Non and Culber, where Culber just does not understand his the Barzan man's reasoning and considers him irrational. And Non's response is, just because you can't understand someone's decision doesn't mean it's irrational. Right. And I think that's an important point to remember across the board, you know?
Yeah, that there's a and then Michael even has a line where she says something about if there's a logic to his behavior, right? Like, which
if there is, he can be reasoned with.
Right. Which is interesting coming from her Vulcan background, right?
Right.
That her use of the word logic. But the idea from the Vulcan side is that logic is a certain thing, right? And there's a certain way of being. There is logic, and logic says this, and logic dictates that.
Right.
Yet at the same time, there is a certain subjectivity to reasoning. There is a certain subjectivity to what we might call logic, in that you might not follow the discipline of logic, right? But the idea that you can put ideas together in a way that makes sense and works for you in your own perspective is valid. And that there can be more than one valid perspective. That's something that I think Christian culture has a really hard time grasping onto, which is one reason we're constantly cutting ourselves off from one another,
right,
in fellowship, because we can't be with people who see things differently,
right?
So, and I don't want to throw that directly at Christians, like we're the only ones who do that.
Sure. Can we say politics?
Right. It's not on this show.
Yeah.
But it is very much like we get enough of it. We talk about religion. Goodness gracious. But it does seem that I guess that's just the context I know, right? That's the context I see all the time, and that's the context that grieves me the most, because Jesus did pray that we would be one as he and the Father are one, and I think it's our responsibility to try to make that come true. And try to make it be a reality.
I do want to throw out there's also a little bit, cause I kind of got some vibes there, and I want to be clear that we're not advocating any sort of anti-expertise stance. There is such a thing as expertise, and just because you think you can't see the Earth's curvature means that the Earth is flat.
Right.
Because the other side of what you're saying is that, well, to me, my logic is I cannot see the curvature of the Earth, therefore the Earth is not a curve, it's a flat.
Right. So that leads into, I think, the limits of subjectivity, right? Because there is such a thing as objectivity. There in Christian circles particularly during like the sort of flux of the postmodern transition of the early part of this millennium, you all have this conversation that is essentially like, okay, well, we traditionalists believe in objective truth, and then all these new postmodernists believe in subjective truth, and their argument is that everything is subjective. Well, everything's not subjective, everything's objective. We believe in objective truth because there's an object of God who created an objective reality. And I particularly deal with this in relationship to aesthetics, but in many ways, these two ideas are neither one complete to explain the world. I was very quick in that era to embrace the truth of subjectivity. But at the same time, I also had to bring in the idea that no, but objectivity still exists. There is objective truth. There's objective reality to you know, whether or not, like you said, whether or not the earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's objective reality there. There's observable truth that we can see. But there are also subjective experiences or different ways of accomplishing the same end that are subjective, that are equally valid. And they're two parts of life, and you really need to make sure you don't mix them, in my opinion.
Right.
So good pointing that out there. I appreciate that.
For those of us who think that Exo-Jesus is a cool mecha suit, what is aesthetics? Can you define that for those of us at home?
What is aesthetics? Oh, I'm sorry, because you were saying Exo-Jesus instead of
Yeah.
Exegesis, which is what you always used to say when we were So aesthetics is just the study of beauty.
Okay.
It's really it. People usually often talk about it with relationship to art, and the arts is a good place to talk about aesthetics. But from my perspective, reducing aesthetics to the arts reduces our view of aesthetics, and reducing arts to aesthetics reduces our view of the arts. So in other words, we might say that art is bad if it's not beautiful, but that assumes that the goal of art is to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what the goal of art necessarily is, though some art is meant to be beautiful and others is not. Others is meant to be discordant and disturbing. At the same time, aesthetics, beauty to me is a lot bigger than just like visual beauty or even oral beauty, or there are all kinds of different experiences of beauty. I think we have beautiful ideas, beautiful truths. So I am for a broadened perspective on both aesthetics and art, but they're often talked about together in philosophical circles. But
okay, thank you for the clarification there.
Yeah, clarification, and also more than you asked for, which is what I do.
Good. Yeah.
But yeah, there's an objective reality though of what's going on with the Barzan man's family,
mm-hmm.
right? I mean, they're gone. Of course, Nan has that interesting line: Barzans view death differently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to know a little more about that.
Yeah, that was the same thing my wife said. Like, she was hoping that they would go into that and how they differ from how humans view death, and then it was just kind of dropped. They didn't go any further into it.
That was a little disappointing.
Yeah.
That was a little disappointing. Not the only disappointing thing in that part of the episode. I see what you think of this. Like last week we talked about whether or not Michael should have gone into the pool with Adira.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like Michael should have been the one to talk the Barzan fella out of his tree. When to go, like, because Nan's trying to reason with him,
mm-hmm.
and Q's just like, she's too close to this and all that. I'm like, I don't think so. I think Michael's assessment is correct. And I think we should have given Nan, on her way out the door, for all we know, for the rest of Star Trek,
mm-hmm.
the opportunity to have a good scene like that instead of giving it to Michael, who gets one of those every episode.
Right. Agreed.
That was one of those moments where I was a little like, look, I don't mind the Star Trek series focusing primarily on one character. That's fine. Or seeing through one character's eyes mostly, or leaning
mm-hmm.
on one character. I mean, we've always had that to one degree or another in Star Trek. Right. It's just that this is not a captain and it's a black woman, and so people get all antsy. But that did feel like a bit of gymnastics to try to put Michael in a place where she didn't necessarily belong or wasn't necessarily the best person for the job. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that got on my nerves a little bit in this episode. So,
agreed.
Do with that what you will. What else in this episode? Oh, I had the thought. Is it okay if I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, I had the thought. Michael was talking about the crew of the Discovery as a breathing organism,
mm-hmm.
right? Saru misquotes her later in the episode and says a living organism. But I thought it was really interesting that that conversation they had at the end of the episode about ideals and people. That Saru says the ideals of the Federation have saved me more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael says, well, it's the people who have saved me. And I've really come to find that Starfleet or the Federation, I don't know which they say, they're both being conflated at this point, is its people. Like, the Federation is its people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really separate them anymore. And I think that's very true, and I think that's very good. And I think that's something to look at from our perspective. I mean, I would call myself post-evangelical. I think a lot of people our age and in our part of the world are post-evangelical because we went through that postmodern shift and in many ways didn't resist it because we saw the truth of it, even if we hung on to stuff we had before. And a lot of what happened there is that our church world didn't move with us. Our church world has come to be out of sync with the way we see the rest of the world. And so we have become out of sync with our church world. And so that sense that Michael has in this episode of that merging of people and ideals, that merging of people into a living organism, that sort of thing, to me, that's a beautiful vision for the church. That's what the church is and should be. And we have both a difficulty in seeing that right now because the institutions we look to for that can seem untrustworthy or can be untrustworthy or can fall apart underneath us, or our relationship with them can crumble even if they're doing fine. But I think if you're having that kind of relationship with churches and with Christianity, which I know a lot of our listeners are, I want to say also that having been in that space for almost 20 years myself, that it also creates an opportunity to see God at work everywhere and to realize that the church is the people. You used to do that thing with your hands, here's the church, here's the steeple,
Here's the steeple,
yep. See all the people, right? Like the people are the church in that little exercise, right? Because once you show the people, the building goes away, right? And because the church is not the building, the church is the people, and the church is the work of God in people. And I think when you like in the housing bubble, there was a news story I read about churches losing their buildings and starting to meet like outdoors. And they said, this is the best thing that's happened to us because we're not weighed down by the debt of our building. Our whole existence isn't just to prop up this package of debt that we meet in every week. And we're able to meet and minister to our community where they are. We don't have to have people come to us. We can do what we need to do. We're not tied down by this building anymore. And I found that very fascinating. I don't know how that experience played out and in how many places it played out. But the point is that it can feel disorienting, but just like our characters in Star Trek are disoriented right now and are reorienting themselves, that reorientation comes in one another. And sometimes just those personal relationships that you can develop with other people who are on the same journey, that's still a church. That's still the church. That's still the body of Christ, moving and working in the world. Find that, hang on to it, cling on to it. Cling on. There we go.
Yeah.
Twice in one episode. But hang on to that because that is really where the church is. And you can find that in institutions and you can find it outside institutions because God is everywhere. But I just thought that was a really interesting moment. That conversation that they had. And I would hope also, like you were mentioning the previous episode, where I can't believe I don't remember the name of the episode. Far From Home, I think, is what it is. The one where they're at the saloon. The idea in that episode and the idea that keeps recurring is like, these are Starfleet people, these are Federation people. We can trust them because they stand for something. They believe in something. And would that the name Christian meant that, right? I mean, I was looking through some organizations, some support organizations recently for, just for people in crisis. And I was scrolling down the list and I was like, well, I don't want to click on the Christian one because they have some crazy ideas about this. If you click on a Christian organization about this, I
wouldn't say like across the board.
Not across the board. Not across the board, but that thought creeped into my mind.
Yeah, I will concede that there is it can be a crapshoot.
Yes.
You don't know what you're going to get.
Well, it is. It is with anything. It is with anything. But I found myself recoiling from the Christian option because I was like, Christian, air quotes, organizations often have some really sketchy views on this particular issue. And I'm afraid that I won't get good advice if I go there. And the fact that occurred to me, I found unsettling. And it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
It should be more like, oh, Christians, yeah, they stand for something. Christians, yeah, you can trust them because they're trustworthy. We've lost that.
Right. It's like there's a lot of tropes in films and TV shows about the evil church pastor, right?
Right.
And it's like, those things are kind of there for a reason. Like I get it. I get on the flip side that, there is evil in the world and it's working against us, and there's evil working against the church too, and maybe someone's trying to color someone's perspective of the church. But on the other hand, there's still some legitimacy to the complaint, to the criticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
I
go ahead.
I do have to stick up for the church a little bit here. I do want to say that there are some churches that are making leaps and bounds towards catching up.
Absolutely.
With where we are.
And that's why I keep in these conversations saying you might find these things in institutional settings.
Right.
You might find these things in a place with a pastor that meets every Sunday. You might find that. That's out there. I've found that, more than one place. Sure, but don't despair if you can't find it there. You're not alone.
Right. It's not the only place you have to find it. And you're not a bad Christian if you don't go to church every Sunday.
Absolutely. I agree with that. 100%. So, yeah. What else is on this episode? Have we covered the episode? I don't know. I feel like did we nerd on this episode enough?
There's one last thing I wanted to say.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
On that scene that you were talking about with Saru and Burnham at the end.
Yeah.
I know we've been gushing about Saru as captain this whole season. This one was just another point, another feather in the cap of why I love him as the captain, where he needs to get that point across to Burnham. And you know how the Oreo theory says when you're going to criticize someone, you say something nice and then say something critical and then say something nice. And the things you say nice can be kind of superficial just to cover the criticism that you have. The way Saru delivered first the criticism and then paused a beat to let it sink in so that she could understand it was genuine before he gently rebuked her, just made me feel like that was another masterful piece of captainship.
You mean first the compliment?
Yes.
And then the rebuke. Yes.
What did I say?
Absolutely. You said criticism.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah,
my mistake.
Yeah, but I get you. No, you're bang on. That's absolutely right. Because he used that, he led with kindness first, he led with gentleness first. Go ahead.
And it was genuine, right? It wasn't just, let me think of something that, you dressed nicely today, but it was genuine, and he gave her time to process that and accept it and allow that to build her up so that the next thing he said wasn't just smacking her down.
And I have to say, that is something I've worked on in myself, to speak to other people as affirmingly as I can, even when I have something critical to say. Sometimes my critique gets too, I find myself not being able to critique as gently as I should, and maybe not leading as gently as I should. I don't know. I striking that balance, I have found personally to be very difficult despite my best intentions.
You know what I think was a key component and is relevant to our efforts to do that? The space between. The event happened earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
Time and events transpire, which gives, maybe Saru wasn't mad at the time that happened, but it gives both of them time to distance themselves emotionally from that moment so that they can come at it more objectively.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is hard, because when you have something that's really weighing on you, it's hard to hold that back for any period of time.
True.
Especially, if you care about it a lot, and especially when you come up from and this isn't a bad thing, but coming from a background of having that sense of the unction of the Spirit and all that, and wanting to follow through on something you think maybe God is compelling you to do, or wants you to do, drawing you to do. It's really hard to feel like, and I've done this actually a couple of times recently, where I've written a thing or I've said a thing or whatever, and it's like I worked on it and I had it ready and I thought it was ready, but I didn't really wait as long as I've told myself I would wait when I do those things. And I don't think it came through the way it was supposed to. And that is very difficult. So that discipline of waiting before you send that long email, or that long text, right? Like I have gotten in the habit of composing a text or a message or whatever that I know is weighty, composing it outside of a format where I can actually accidentally send it, because I've accidentally sent them, reading it several times and editing it and getting it where I want it. And then the hardest part is not having confidence in my own writing and editing skills enough to send it right away, but waiting, because it can be the best written piece of text, but it may strike completely the wrong tone, or send the wrong message, or say the right thing in the wrong way, or emphasize the wrong part of the right thing. And boy, when you're dealing with touchy issues and people's emotions, that's hard, especially if you're close to somebody and love them a lot. That's where it's easiest to hurt people. So that again, and Saru, I was writing something sensitive, which I again have not sent, but I was writing something sensitive earlier this week, and Saru's voice was in my head. I was writing it in Saru's voice because that was the tone I wanted to strike. He's a great example. He's a wonderful, wonderful captain, wonderful character. Yeah.
One wonderful human being.
Yeah.
Of all the souls that I've known, his is the most human.
Kelpian. Don't mock that scene. Don't mock that scene. That still makes me cry.
Sorry.
You're laughing because everything makes me cry. Shut up.
You're a weepy man.
I am a weepy man.
So yeah, we've geeked on quite a bit about the episode. The one last thing we want to geek out on, so that it leads us into our next topic, is the other Starship cameo.
Yes, but wait, before we get there, can I just say real quickly, our new triumvirate for this series, which is Tilly, Stamets, and Reno. They are beautiful in this episode. They're beautiful together. I love them. Because they're such great nerds, but they're all nerds in different ways. Stamets all orderly and gentle, but orderly and specific. And Tilly deeply knowledgeable and detailed in the same kind of sense, but like scattered and zany and crazy and creative. And then like Reno completely relaxed and laid back, and like she actually doesn't care, but she really is totally invested. Like they're so different,
and they work so well,
McCoy kind of way, but
through the dysfunction. Like none of that trio is non-essential.
Right, exactly. But I love it. I love them together. It just makes me so happy. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other ship cameo that we were both. Well, I didn't catch it during the episode. You pointed it out to me as we were talking off air. Apparently, there was, in addition to the Voyager, the USS Nog made an appearance, and its ship type is Eisenberg Class.
Yes, which is the title for this episode. Although I do want to say there's also the USS Armstrong, which could obviously be a nod to Neil Armstrong, but I like to think that it's actually a nod to Vaughn Armstrong, who is the actor you will probably best know as Admiral Maxwell Forrest from Enterprise.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, but he has played like 12 different characters in 28 episodes over 4 series of Star Trek.
What?
And yes, he is one of only 5 actors to play 7 or more different characters in the Star Trek franchise.
7 or more. Man, and here I was thinking I'm impressed for catching all of Jeffrey Combs' characters.
Right. Well, Jeff Combs is in that list along with J.G. Hertzler. But yeah, so he's just a well-known guy. And when I saw USS Armstrong, it was Vaughn Armstrong that came to my head first. And then I was like, oh, it might be Neil. But anyway, there you
Nice.
go. So yes, transitioning into the theme for the episode, USS
Definitely,
Nog.
definitely not Lance.
Definitely not Lance Armstrong. For sure. For sure. But yeah, the USS Nog and the Eisenberg Class. Eisenberg Class is the title of the episode. And
Title of our episode, not the
title of
Discovery
our episode,
episode.
not the Discovery episode, to be clear. Which I have to clarify in my own head every week when I'm talking about the episode. I'm like, how do I say this so that I can tell people exactly which episode? Anyway, yeah. So we just kind of decided that we were looking for Star Trek news for this episode, and we were also looking for a theme for this episode because, as you noticed in our discussion of the episode, it was awfully scattered. There's so many different ideas. We even talk about looking up
Oh yeah.
as a theme. Looking up, which I think is a great image of hope. I can just kind of toss it off here as far as what I see, but it's a great image of hope, but it's more than just hope, more than just hopefulness. It's directed, it's oriented, it has a telos, it has a goal. I lift my eyes to the hills from whence comes my help. I mean, that expectancy, that's expectation. It's very good as we lead toward the Advent season.
Mhm.
So I just love that idea of we're looking up. I think that's such a Star Trek idea, such a Christian idea. Look up, child, as the album says.
Well, everyone's looking up when they talk to Saru.
No kidding. It's crazy watching Michael look up at him. It's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Don't get a kink in your neck there, Michael.
I know. It's like we're gonna have to give everybody else boots or something. Anyway, but yeah, so we got to this thing. We were talking about Star Trek news, and you brought up the USS Nog, and I was like, well, that's not news. I've had like 3 different people text me and say, oh, did you see the USS Nog thing? You should talk about that on the show. And we are talking about it on the show, but I figured let's take a moment, just like Star Trek Discovery did, and give a little tribute to Nog and to Aron Eisenberg. So that's what we're going to do for the last part of our episode. Tim and I work every week to try to make the theme of the episode, leap off of the Discovery episode for that week. And that can be a daunting task, especially with an episode like this one. But, everybody's talking about USS Nog. That's the main thing. And also Non's departure. But let's talk about another departure, which is Aron Eisenberg. He died last September. And he was only 50 years old, which is just 10 years older than me at the time. There have been a lot of deaths in Star Trek. And I've gone through a lot of them. I've grieved a lot of them. Leonard Nimoy obviously was one of them. There've been so many.
But a lot of them, it's like, okay, they still got to live
a long life,
right?
Yeah. Aron is up there with Anton Yelchin as like an early tragic death in Star Trek. We don't have a ton of those, which is a good thing.
Not complaining.
Yeah, I mean that's good.
So don't jinx us with this 2020 stuff.
Right, no kidding. But we've lost a lot of good people. But Aron's death, I think, hit me. I don't know. It might have hit me harder than any other, honestly. Just because of that. Just because it's like, I think the way Nog works as a character is that you develop this undercurrent of this deep compassion and love for him over time, and it kind of sneaks up on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it was the same way just with Aron generally for me. That when he died, I was like, wow, I really care about this. Like, this really breaks my heart. Because it's like, wow, he was like 3 years younger than Star Trek itself.
Wow.
Yeah. At the time.
Uh-huh.
And it just came out of nowhere. I mean, you knew he had health struggles and whatever, but he'd had them for most of his life. And so, it's one of those things that you don't expect to come real soon, but it did. And it was really hard. But I think it's interesting that his best episode, I think, is It's Only a Paper Moon.
Easily,
yeah. We'll say that easily. Yeah, I think that's right. That was his. That was as rounded and as deep and as rich as Nog became as a character.
mm-hmm.
Was in that episode. And for those of you who may or may not remember the episode, it's when Nog loses a leg in battle, right? And he's lost a leg in a previous episode, and he has a new replacement leg, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it looks and feels and moves just like a leg, but it hurts. And there's that very real trauma that he's still working through, of having been in war and having lost his leg, and like objectively he should be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are no pain signals being sent to his brain, but his leg hurts. This biosynthetic glory, it works perfectly, but it's just not right. And that's so much. And I think we saw that, I won't go too much into it, but we saw that with Detmer in Discovery recently, where, there's something wrong with her, but we don't know what it is for a couple of episodes, and there's something wrong with her, and it's not, it doesn't show up on a scan,
Mm-hmm.
they send her out of sick bay. You don't have a concussion, so you're fine, go back on the field or whatever,
Right.
because we're doing triage in here, so scoot along,
Mm-hmm.
and but she's not fine. That's where we got our episode. It's okay to not be okay. Or no, it's okay to be not okay.
Yeah.
But, our own episode title, and I can't say it right. But that's what Nog is. Nog is very not okay in this episode. It's Only a Paper Moon. And I think it's a beautiful story and a beautiful performance. And it speaks to something so few people truly understand, even as they might experience it in their own lives, how these intangible struggles that we have, these in some senses imperceptible pains that we have, affect us very deeply, and that they are real, that it's not being made up, that it's not being invented, that we need to listen to one another when we say this hurts. Because it really does. It really does. And I think about that, how we deal with children, even, there's so many kinds of people who we tend to sort of make less than human, and children are among them. And I think children tell us things all the time about how they hurt, or they're sad, or they're lonely, or something hurts them physically, something hurts them emotionally, and we tend to kind of like brush it off, or try to even speak against it, like, oh, well, it's not really that bad, because we can see objectively, I can see objectively as a parent, like, oh, other kids have a lot worse than you do, you should be happy with what you have. And yet the pain is real that's there. And so, I don't know, an ability to recognize that in ourselves and others, I think can come again from seeing a story like this,
Mm-hmm.
that tells us that there is real pain, that is intangible.
That really hits close to home, I have to say. We were talking prior to a previous episode, you and I mentioned a pastor once that said, when you're trying to love your enemy as your neighbor, that sort of thing, sometimes your enemy is yourself. And when you struggle with depression, like a lot of times I am my own worst enemy, and I don't believe myself when I hurt, and just coming to grips with that.
Mm-hmm. Giving yourself even that credit,
That
can be hard. Yeah. No, that yes, that reflects my own experience as well. And I can't tell you how many conversations I have had with close friends where I'm talking about something I'm going through, and I think, maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe I'm just crazy.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm just making this up. I'm just trying to get attention.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Why am I even caring about this? Why does this even matter? This is no big deal. I start trying to look in that objective brain to try to dismiss my own pain. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I like that thing too about, loving your enemy is one thing, but then it's another thing when your enemy is yourself. How many times do we use that phrase? You're your own worst enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good
Right.
Alice Cooper song, by the way. Totally unrelated to this episode, but it's a good Alice Cooper song.
Nice.
But Nog is in It's Only a Paper Moon. I'm trying to think about where he is on that spectrum. I think he is aware of his own pain. He sees it,
Mm-hmm.
and he is insisting to other people that it is real, even though they can't see it. Which, by the way, is an act of courage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, amen to that.
I mean, when people, I have a grandmother, my paternal grandmother, who died years and years ago. She had health struggles her whole life, and she was constantly arguing with her doctors and saying, no, this is how I feel and this is what it is, and there are medications available now for the things that she was telling her doctor were going on back when they were telling her it was all in her head.
Right.
So yeah. But it takes an incredible amount of courage to stand up, especially to friends and family, and say, I'm going through this and it's real, even though I can't show evidence. That's another thing, the Discovery episode, all the people telling all these crazy stories of all these things that they've been through. And when you tell it like that, yeah, it sounds insane. It's like in Last Temptation of Christ, somebody says, did you see Jesus after he resurrected? Like, no, but his followers saw them. They were hiding in the attic with the doors locked, and he appeared to them. It sounds crazy.
Well, when you put it like that,
do
you hear yourself speaking?
Right, exactly. And it can be really hard to communicate those things that we have seen and heard and know to be true within ourselves to other people. So first of all, it's an act of courage for Nog to do that. And he can't turn away from his own pain. He can't turn away from himself. But at the same time, I mean, as much as his holographic world, it's also interesting, the sort of therapeutic process there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about this to some degree on a previous episode. But the idea that we have to maybe go through something that, I mean, in a certain sense, he's thinking about something other than his pain, right? He's distracting himself.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, underneath that, he's working through it. But it gets to a point where he's at a crossroads, and Vic sees this.
Mm-hmm.
That crossroads that he's at, where he's either got to accept his real life, take the strength that he's gained by finding himself capable within this other realm that's away from where he lives, and take it back to his real life, or get lost in the fantasy and never actually take advantage of the gains that he got while he was there. I think of it like, it's like if you went on a prayer retreat and just stayed there. If you went to camp, you go to camp when you're a kid, and if you're like me and you go to like a Christian camp and it's restoring and it's renewal and it's all that stuff, what if you just stayed there, or you stayed at that conference or whatever, and you didn't take that experience and take it back with you? And that's the growth that Nog has to go through. And when he comes out of the holosuite finally, and Ezra asks him, are you okay? And he says, no, but I will be. And it's that, it's that song that I shared last week, which I'll just put in the description again this week. Why not? There will be a day when you can say you're okay and mean it. And Nog is not there, right? Nog is not there yet, but he has that knowledge that it's going to be okay. It will be all right. He will be okay. It's Lita who asks him that. not Esri. But that's the point. Are you okay? No, but I will be. And boy, and it relates to, I think, to an old Christian saying, and I tracked this down, and it's in the book, but the already not yet of salvation, right? That I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved. In other words, that God is not stingy with grace, mercy, and love. That it takes, that there is salvation has been earned for us, right? I have been saved. But salvation is also an ongoing process that like I said, the being transformed by the renewal of our minds. There's that sanctification, as some people call it, or the little pieces of salvation that we get, as we go. I am being saved, right? The ways in which we're saved from this or saved from that, and then I will be saved, that ultimate culmination of salvation for ourselves and for creation, that all will be made right. That God will put everything to rights, as N.T. Wright says, and that all will be made new. So no, I'm not okay, but I will be. I might be okay tomorrow, in part. But I can know that I will be okay ultimately, because there's a salvation already wrought for me. So I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's a reality of our lives, that it's never this clean arrival. We learn about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the end of the pyramid, at the end of the thing, you reach self-actualization, and then you go back and lead others, and you never reach self-actualization. You never reach, like, okay, I'm complete, I've learned everything I have to learn, now I'm going to go teach everyone. We are all always learning, we're all always growing, and we're all always going through processes of being not okay, and then being okay again, and then being not okay. But I think Nog's story is one that can help anybody, whether you're dealing with that kind of trauma or not, help anybody get through times like that. But yeah, so Eisenberg Class, I picked, we argued over the title for this episode. Eisenberg Class, to me, was just saying that Aron Eisenberg had class, that he was just a great person. I can see in him the joy that he brought to other people, the energy that he brought, the sincerity, the deep humanity that he brought, that he grabbed onto life and tried to live it to the best of his ability, not just for himself, but for people around him. Like another thing that we didn't discuss in this week's Discovery episode was reaching for the best in ourselves and others, right? How do we skate past that? I'm telling you, this episode was all over the map.
I don't know. That was another one, though, that kind of gave me the same sort of feeling as when Culber sent Burnham into to talk the man off the ledge. It was, to me, that one felt a little bit like almost borderline turning Michael into a Mary Sue.
Yeah, okay.
Just propping her up a little too much. I don't know.
I was concerned about it going in that direction, but at the same time, it's two characters parting from one another.
That's fair.
No, that's nice things like that.
Yeah.
But point being, reaching for the best in ourselves and in others, and I think Aron embodied that in so many ways, that he tried to encourage others as well, just by being that bright spot in the room,
And Nog is the character that is affected by that. He's at the start of the series, he's the stereotypical Ferengi.
Yeah.
And he moves to being almost the embodiment of what the Federation stands for.
Absolutely. He absolutely is. And the embodiment of what I was talking about last week, of taking the last in line and putting them first, taking the marginalized and putting a spotlight on them, right? Same kind of thing, How much of an outcast, boy, how much of an outcast is a disabled person or a person that goes through health struggles? Aaron was living on his second transplanted kidney. I don't know all of his. By the way, transplants save lives. Be a donor. But I don't know what all of his problems were. I've never read anything real detailed. I didn't really feel like it's my business to go digging. But I know he had a lot of trouble, and that can make somebody an outcast all by itself, And I think being able to play somebody who's different, being able to play somebody who is kind of like weird and doesn't fit. I think Aaron could probably relate to that a lot in that way. And again, Nog is that person who is the outcast, the stone that the builders rejected. That has become a cornerstone, which of course was said about Jesus ultimately, obviously, but it's also something that we can all echo. And he embodies Starfleet so much because he's so committed to Starfleet ideals that he's willing to sacrifice. He's willing to even go there amidst rejection from other Ferengi and from his own family. In order to stand up for what he believes in and to build a bridge between the Federation and his culture, even if people in his culture don't want that bridge. He's a real pioneer, and and he's a very inspiring character in that regard too. He grew from this little, noisy
bad influence,
noisy nuisance, right? Into I think somebody we can all look up to. I think now look up. Oh, look at that.
Can you imagine Nog and Saru standing next to each other?
Oh, that would be great. I'd love to see that scene.
Yeah, and we'll never get it.
Great. We'll never get it.
Yeah. Oh. Now I'm sad again.
Yeah, right. Oh boy.
One last thing I want to geek out about. So, back on
please.
Discovery, since this is going to be fun to edit. It's a long episode.
Yeah.
But one of the ships, I don't know if you caught it when they were when the crew were geeking out over all the ships at the Federation headquarters. One of the ships was entirely holographic.
Yes, I remember Tilly saying that.
Yeah, that was. On one hand, it was appealing, and on the other hand, it took me back to the days. And Chris Clark, if you are listening to this, I'm talking about you, of playing my Star Trek customizable card game made by Decipher that I loved so much. He would play this all hologram deck, and it just killed me. I couldn't do anything to counter it, and it was so frustrating, and I hated it. It just sent me flashbacks to my card game days.
That's great. I hope Chris listens.
Me too.
Well, that's cool. So anyway, have we done what we need to?
I think so. We still need to answer a question.
We need to answer our audience question. Shall we do that now?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Okay.
And by the way, thanks, Aaron.
Yes.
For everything.
So we have another question from one of our dear listeners.
Our dear listeners.
Indeed.
Now,
probably.
The elk listeners, the moose listeners, where are you? But the deer are always sending us stuff. Whatever. It's cool.
Exactly. This one reads, in a recent podcast episode, you didn't bleep Tim out when he swore, and Discovery has been a lot freer with swearing, particularly the F-bomb. Doesn't that feel out of character to Star Trek for you, especially as Star Trek relates to the gospel?
I don't think that it has anything to do with relating to the gospel personally, just because I am not of the opinion that, Christians don't swear, or you're not allowed to swear if you're a Christian. If that was true, then that would disqualify a lot of really incredible people who love Jesus. And so I just think that's kind of a cultural thing. Especially since what counts as a swear changes over time, and what counts as a really bad swear changes over time. and has always. So I don't really put a lot of stock in that. So we'll just set that aside right off the front, personally. You sound like you have something you want to say about that.
Yeah, I guess my take on it is that it's more about, there's so many times in scripture where Jesus says it's more about what's in your heart that matters.
Yes.
And so I guess I feel like I can be, just hanging out with my friends and someone ribs me good and I drop the F-bomb. That's just us being friends. There's no malice in my heart from that. But if I'm driving down the road and someone cuts me off and with malice in my heart, I say, gosh darn it, actual gosh darn it, I feel like that's worse than dropping the F-bomb with my friends, because what's going through my heart is genuine malice, regardless of what my actual words are.
Right. And the other part of it is the message, and people get what you say. And so whatever you say, however you say it, people know what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of that too is, just because it's permissible doesn't mean it's beneficial.
Right. So if it's making someone else stumble.
Right. How is it going to affect the people around me? Not just how is it perceived by them, but how is it going to affect them? If you use certain verbiage, even if you drop it casually, what does that do to the overall level of discourse around you? What does that do to, how do other people perceive it? How do they perceive you because of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is that to consider as well.
That's true. That's fair.
I think that's more the thing to think about than what words do I use, because I could use very genteel words, very acceptable words, and I could say horrible things to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it really has a lot more to do with intent, has a lot more to do with heart. But at the same time, avoiding certain words in certain contexts is just generally polite and all that. So down to, do I think it's Star Trek? Do I think it's not in keeping with Star Trek to have the swears in Star Trek? I don't like it myself personally, even though I don't generally have a problem with all kinds of language. I'm a Martin Scorsese fan, so
right.
If I had a problem with that, I would be in a bad place. But at the same time, it's Star Trek, and it's a little funny in Star Trek. It's a little different in Star Trek because there hasn't been a lot of it. Although I do like to point out that the first F-bomb in Star Trek was actually in the 2009 film, because they used the Beastie Boys song Sabotage, and it appears in that song, and the song appears in the film, and the clip with that in it is right there in the soundtrack with nothing else on top of it, unedited. So it's there, but it's just, people aren't listening.
Right.
So, and I really like that the first actual spoken line of dialogue that was an F word in Discovery was Tilly nerding out over science.
Yeah.
That made me happy. But at the same time, it is a little uncomfortable. And in Picard, we haven't talked about Picard yet, but in Picard, it gets a little loose in there for a little while with the use of it. And it's fine. I think, it's fine to say we can do Star Trek with more mature content and it can still be Star Trek. And that's true. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that, except it would be nice to be able to show any Star Trek I want to my kid. But I mean, that's true of the violence and sexuality and other stuff too. We've watched some original series episodes that I've regretted showing it. So, it's like, oh, I didn't remember that episode very well. So, Star Trek has always kind of played with that line. It's just that it's looked different in different decades, and we're in a different decade now.
True.
And so, it's not the comfiest thing for me, and I kind of would prefer that it was. I would prefer they didn't do it. In all honesty, I'd prefer it was just kept off the table. We've gone there. Okay, that was fine. Let's move on with our lives, because
I kind of feel like it's human.
It is.
It's something that we all do in some form or another. I don't see why Star Trek personnel should be any different.
That's true too, and that's a very valid point. And I recognize that when I say that about Star Trek, that's really just personal preference. I think the honest truth is what you're saying, that it's just Star Trek ought to be able to encompass humanity, just like Christian faith ought to be able to encompass humanity, which is why we shouldn't be so focused on that. I mean, the story I always tell is that I was at a Bible study group or Christian small group, whatever, years and years and years ago at somebody's house. And this person's in the group, this woman was just crying and talking about her life and just really pouring her guts out, and she was dropping quite a few F-bombs. and the leader of the group came over and just kind of gently said, would she mind watching her language? And I'm like, dude, now is not the time, man. Like, can we just kind of focus on how her heart is breaking right in front of us right now instead of the language she's using to express it? That's where I'm like, Christian culture, you need to kind of like get some perspective.
Right.
So, right. But yeah. So yeah, it's a mixed bag. That's the answer.
We can't talk about swearing in Star Trek, however, without that fabulous line from Generations as the Enterprise is crashing.
Yes.
I cracked up as a high school / college age kid. I cracked up so hard in the theater at that.
Yep. That was pretty funny. That was pretty funny. It's right up there with Spock's
colorful metaphors. Yes.
Spock's colorful metaphors in Star Trek 4. Yep. See, use the humorous effect.
It's true.
A good thing. But yeah. All right. Good. Well, thanks for that question. We appreciate you sending that in, and please send us more.
And we should clarify on the questions. It doesn't have to be about the podcast that you're hearing right now. Before we record the next podcast, you guys very well might watch the next episode of Discovery. So feel free to ask a question about that. Just make sure you mark spoiler in it so that we don't read it too soon.
Right.
Before we watch the episode. But yeah, the question can be about it. The timing doesn't matter.
Yeah, it can be about anything. So we appreciate it. Yeah, that's awesome. So, Tim, I feel like this is just a perfunctory thing that we do now because of the new format. But what's going on next week?
Next week, Kevin, we will cover the 6th episode of Discovery and see what comes up.
Wow, that's amazing and fresh.
I feel like you should just record us like saying those two lines and then just insert that.
Oh, but that would be so much less organic.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear whatever that's going to be, I hope you'll join us next time. And in the meantime, please like, share, comment, rate, and subscribe. And also, please send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and Facebook, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on this very show. Sir Tim, have you anything else to say to the folks at home? Well, that's none of my business. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.
I'm Tim Van Orden.
And I'm Kevin Senes. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper.
See you next time.